When Nathaniel Cross rode into Hackberry Valley that frozen February morning, he carried a loaded Winchester in absolute certainty. Nobody trespassed on his land. The smoke curling from the abandoned cabin wasn't just an intrusion, it was an insult. He'd burned squatters out before. This would be no different, but when he kicked open that door, ready for confrontation, what he found would shatter everything he thought he knew about power, control, and the dangerous line between protecting someone and owning them. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels. The winter of 1881 came to Montana territory like a fist wrapped in iron, cold that could crack wood, wind that scoured the valley floors clean of anything not rooted deep enough to fight back. And in the heart of Hackberry Valley, on 15,000 acres of prime grazing land that stretched from the Bitterroot foothills to the frozen Snake River tributaries, Nathaniel Cross surveyed his empire with the satisfaction of a man who'd carved civilization from wilderness with his bare hands and sheer brutality of will. He was 34 years old, wealthy beyond anything his Tennessee sharecropper father could have imagined, respected or feared, which amounted to the same thing in this country. His ranch house stood 3 stories tall, built from timber he'd milled himself, staffed by men who jumped when he spoke and asked no questions when he pointed. Control was everything. Control was survival. And on the morning of February 16th, someone had the goddamn audacity to light a fire on his land without permission. Nathaniel saw the smoke from his bedroom window, a thin gray line rising from the eastern section of the valley where the old Mackenzie cabin had stood abandoned for 3 years. The structure had been collapsing even when he'd bought the property. He'd meant to burn it down, clear the land, but it sat so far from the main operations that he'd simply forgotten about it. Nobody forgot things on his land. "Dutch!" His voice carried down the hallway with the sharp crack of command. His foreman appeared within 30 seconds, hat already in hand. Dutch Kowalski had worked for Nathaniel since the beginning, a former Army scout with eyes like chips of granite and a moral compass that pointed wherever Nathaniel told it to. Smoke, Eastern Valley, Mackenzie Place. Nathaniel pulled on his heavy coat, already moving. "Get horses ready, and bring the Winchester." "You thinking trouble?" "I'm thinking someone's about to learn a hard lesson about property rights." They rode out with 4 additional men. The morning temperature hovered around 12 degrees, and their horses' breath created clouds that hung in the still air like accusations. Nathaniel's rage built with each mile. This was how it started. One squatter, then another, then suddenly you had homesteaders filing claims and lawyers from Helena crawling all over your land with their surveys and their territorial acts and their educated arguments about public domain. He'd spent 12 years building this ranch, 12 years of broken bones and frozen cattle and negotiations with men who thought violence was just another business tool. He'd survived all of it by being harder, meaner, and more absolutely certain than anyone else. The cabin came into view around a bend in the valley trail. Nathaniel pulled his horse up short. The structure had been rebuilt. The sagging roof, he remembered, was now straight, covered with new shingles. The broken windows had been fitted with oiled paper that glowed warmly from firelight within. Firewood, neatly split and stacked, lined one entire wall under a lean-to that definitely hadn't existed 3 months ago. "Well, I'll be damned," Dutch muttered. "That's professional work." It was. And that made Nathaniel even angrier. This wasn't some desperate drifter huddling in ruins. This was someone who'd moved in, someone who'd made improvements, someone who thought they had a right. "Everyone stays here," Nathaniel said, dismounting. "This is my property. I'll handle this personally." He crossed the frozen ground with long strides, one hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The closer he got, the more details emerged. The door had been repaired, its hinges, new brass that caught the weak winter sunlight. Even the front step had been re-leveled. Nathaniel didn't knock. This was his cabin on his land. He kicked the door open. The woman by the fireplace didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply turned, a cast-iron poker in one hand, and an expression on her face that somehow managed to convey both zero surprise and absolute readiness. "You're trespassing," Nathaniel said. "I'm aware." Her voice carried an educated accent that didn't match her practical wool dress and work-worn hands. "You must be Nathaniel Cross." That stopped him. People didn't use his name like that, familiar, uninflected, as if they were equals meeting on neutral ground. "This is my land. That means this is my cabin." "Technically, yes." She set the poker down carefully, deliberately. "I'm not disputing ownership. I'm negotiating terms." Nathaniel stared at her. She was perhaps 28, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, face angular and weathered in a way that spoke of recent hardship. But her eyes, gray, direct, absolutely fearless, held his without flinching. "There are no terms," he said. "You leave. Today. Now. Then you lose valuable labor." She gestured around the cabin. "This structure was 3 months from collapse. I've reinforced the foundation, replaced the roof supports, reglazed the windows, and rebuilt the chimney to proper draft specifications. That represents approximately 200 hours of skilled carpentry." "I didn't ask you to." "Of course not. But it's done, and I can do more." She moved to the table where several tools lay organized with military precision. "Your western fence line has 17 posts that need replacement before spring thaw. Your main barn door hangs crooked, the upper hinge is cracked and will fail completely within 2 months. And your equipment shed has a roof leak that's already damaged at least $300 worth of tack." Nathaniel felt his certainty wavering, which made his anger spike. "How do you know about my property?" "I've been here 6 weeks. I observe, I assess, I solve problems." She met his eyes again. "That's what I do, Mr. Cross. That's what I'm offering. Everyone needs competent labor, especially in winter." She picked up a leather satchel from the corner and extracted a folded document. "I'm proposing a contract. Temporary. I provide skilled maintenance and repair work. In exchange, I receive shelter in this cabin and basic provisions. No wages, no permanent claim, just work for housing until spring." She held out the paper. Nathaniel didn't take it. "I don't know you. I don't know where you came from or what you're running from." "My name is Eliza Moore. I'm a widow. I came from Deer Lodge. And I'm not running from the law, if that's your concern." Her expression didn't change. "I'm running from poverty and the men who think a woman alone is either a victim or an opportunity. This valley is 15 miles from town, no neighbors, just my ranch hands. Yes, that's why I chose it." She set the document on the table. "I don't want proximity to people, Mr. Cross. I want to work. I want shelter. I want to be left alone to rebuild my life without interference or assumption. If you can guarantee those things, I'll guarantee you quality labor. If you can't, tell me now, and I'll leave today." The silence stretched between them. Nathaniel's entire instinct screamed at him to say no, to order her off his property immediately. This wasn't how things worked. You didn't negotiate with trespassers. You didn't make contracts with strange women who rebuilt cabins without permission. But she'd rebuilt this cabin. Perfectly. In winter. But she'd cataloged his property's maintenance issues with professional precision. But she stood there offering him exactly what he valued most: competent, reliable labor. With no emotional manipulation, no pleading, no feminine performance. Just business. "What's your training?" he asked. "My father was a carpenter and civil engineer. I worked alongside him from age 12 until his death 4 years ago. I can frame a building, install a window, repair most mechanical systems, and read architectural plans." "Your husband?" "Also a carpenter. He died 18 months ago, logging accident." Her voice remained level. "I have no children, no family, no one looking for me or expecting me anywhere." That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Nathaniel uneasy in a way he couldn't name. "The contract," he said. "What are the exact terms?" Eliza unfolded the document and read in a clear, practiced voice. "Elizabeth Ann Moore agrees to provide skilled labor to Nathaniel Cross for repair and maintenance of structures and equipment on the Cross Ranch property. In exchange, Nathaniel Cross agrees to provide housing in the Eastern Valley cabin and basic food provisions equivalent to ranch hand rations. Contract term: November 1881 through April 1882. Either party may terminate with 2 weeks' notice. No wages, no ownership claim, no expectation of permanent employment." She looked up. "I added one additional clause after seeing your operation. I want access to your workshop and tools for my own projects during non-working hours. I'll provide my own materials. What projects? Personal items, furniture, maybe a proper door for this cabin. A ghost of something, not quite a smile, crossed her face. I like to stay busy. Nathaniel took the document. The handwriting was precise, educated. The language was clear and legal. Everything about this was wrong, impulsive, irregular, completely outside his normal operations. But he thought about the fence posts, the barn door, the equipment shed leak, the constant struggle to find and keep competent workers in a territory where men drifted from job to job like tumbleweeds. 2 conditions, he said. First, you stay in this valley. You don't come to the main ranch buildings without direct summons. I won't have my men distracted or uncomfortable. Agreed. I prefer solitude anyway. Second, if there's any trouble, any complaints, any problems, any hint that this arrangement is causing disruption, you leave immediately. No 2 weeks' notice, same day. Eliza considered this. Define trouble. Anything I decide is trouble. That's not a definition. That's authoritarianism. Nathaniel felt his jaw tighten. This is my land, Miss Moore. I make the rules. Then make them clear rules, Mr. Cross. I'm offering you professional labor, not indentured servitude. She crossed her arms. If you want the right to dismiss me on a whim, then I want the right to clear dispute resolution. Any termination for cause requires you to state specific grievances. I have 24 hours to respond. If we can't agree, we bring in a neutral arbiter. There is no neutral arbiter out here. Then we ride to town and use the territorial magistrate. They stared at each other. Nathaniel couldn't remember the last time someone had pushed back on his authority this directly. His men didn't argue. His business partners learned quickly not to. Even the lawyers in Helena treated him with careful deference. This woman looked at him like he was just another variable in an equation she was solving. You're very sure of yourself, he said. No, I'm very sure of my skills and very tired of men who think authority replaces specificity. She picked up the poker again and adjusted a log in the fireplace. I've watched too many agreements turn into exploitation because the terms were never clear. I won't do that again. Again? She didn't answer, just poked at the fire with movements that were a little too forceful. Nathaniel made his decision. Fine. Revision to Condition 2. Any termination for cause requires specific stated grievances with 24 hours for response. Neutral arbiter if needed. He pulled a pencil from his pocket and made the notation directly on the document. But understand this, Miss Moore, I don't like complications. I don't like drama. I don't like anything that threatens the smooth operation of my ranch. You stay invisible. You do good work. You cause 0 problems. We'll get along fine. That's all I want, Mr. Cross. He signed the document. She produced a second copy from her satchel. Of course she had a second copy. And he signed that one too. They exchanged papers with the formality of a business transaction, which, Nathaniel reminded himself, was exactly what this was. I'll have Dutch bring provisions twice a month, he said. Make a list of what you need, within reason. Thank you. And I want that fence line repaired before the next snow. I'll start tomorrow. I'll need... She paused, calculating. 40 replacement posts, 3 pounds of nails, 2 gallons of creosote for treatment, and access to your post hole digger. You know how to use a post hole digger? That ghost smile again. Mr. Cross, I can use every tool in your workshop. That's why you signed that contract. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. How did you know about the shed leak? That's not visible from outside. I observed your ranch hands carrying damaged tack to the barn for repair. 3 different occasions. Always the same items. Western saddles, primarily. That pattern suggests water damage from above, not ground moisture. Your shed has a shallow pitch roof, which makes it vulnerable to ice damming. Basic deduction. Nathaniel studied her. You're very observant. It's necessary for survival. There was something in her voice, something hard and sharp beneath the professional calm, that made Nathaniel want to ask more questions. But he just agreed to leave her alone. And he had a ranch to run. The fence line by Friday, he said instead. Understood. He walked out into the cold morning where his men waited with barely concealed curiosity. Well, Dutch asked. She's staying, Temporarily. She'll be doing maintenance work. Nathaniel swung back into his saddle. Nobody bothers her. Nobody talks to her unless it's work-related. She stays in the Eastern Valley. We stay out of her way. Boss, is that? I signed a contract, Dutch. It's handled. He turned his horse toward home. Let's go. We've got a ranch to run. But as they rode back across the frozen valley, Nathaniel couldn't stop thinking about those gray eyes and that absolutely fearless negotiation. About a woman who rebuilt collapsed cabins in winter and carried herself like someone who'd learned to trust nothing but her own competence. About the way she'd said basic deduction like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eliza Moore was definitely going to be a complication. He just didn't know yet whether she'd be the kind he could control. The next morning, Nathaniel woke to find a detailed list on his office desk. He had no idea how it had gotten there. Presumably Dutch had retrieved it at some point, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Fence line repair. Materials required. 40 cedar posts, 8 feet length, 3 pounds. Galvanized nails, 2 gallons creosote. Access to post hole digger, saw, hammer. Work estimate, 4 to 5 days depending on ground frost. Barn door. Materials required. 2 heavy-duty iron hinges, 1-pound wood screws. Access to drill, level, measuring tools. Work estimate, 1 day. Equipment shed. Roof full. Materials required, 12 replacement shingles. 1-pound roofing nails. Tar paper, 10 square feet. Access to ladder, pry bar, hammer. Work estimate, 2 days. Total estimated value of repairs, $340. Cost to you, provisions plus housing as contracted. At the bottom, she'd added one line. I'll begin with the fence line as requested. I assume you'll want the other repairs prioritized by urgency rather than cost. Please advise. Nathaniel sat at his desk for a long moment, the paper in his hand. $340 worth of work. For the cost of a cabin he wasn't using and basic food provisions. It was the best business deal he'd made in months. And somehow that bothered him more than anything else. 3 days later, Nathaniel rode out to check the fence line progress on impulse. He told himself it was normal oversight. He checked on all his workers, but he knew that was a lie. He wanted to see if she was actually doing what she'd claimed she could do. He found her 2 miles down the eastern fence, 3 posts already replaced, and a 4th hole already dug. She worked with a rhythm that spoke of long practice. Dig, measure, set, pack, test. Her coat was hung on the fence. Despite the 20-degree temperature, she'd worked up enough heat that she was down to just a wool shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She didn't stop when he approached. Didn't even look up until she'd finished setting the post and testing its stability. Mr. Cross. She wiped sweat from her forehead. Problem with the work? Just checking progress. I'm on schedule. 4th post going in now. I'll have 10 done by sunset. She gestured down the line. The rot damage is worse than I estimated in 3 sections. I'm replacing those posts completely rather than trying to reinforce them. Better long-term value. Nathaniel dismounted and walked along the fence line, examining her work. The posts were set deep, perfectly plumb, solidly packed. The work was clean and professional. Who taught you to do this? My father. I told you. Most fathers don't teach their daughters carpentry. Most fathers have sons. Eliza pulled the post hole digger from the ground and moved to the next position. Mine didn't, so he taught me everything he would have taught a son. Apparently that was scandalous. Was it? She started digging. People have opinions about women who work with their hands, especially women who do it better than their husbands. Her voice was neutral, but something flickered across her face. My father didn't care about opinions. He cared about competence. Sounds like a practical man. He was. Dig, lift, dump. Dig, lift, dump. He believed work was dignity, that skill was currency, that you could build a life if you just refused to stop building. What happened to him? Pneumonia. Winter of '77. She didn't slow her rhythm. He was 63. Worked until the day he died. Literally. Collapsed on a job site. I'm sorry. Eliza shrugged. He would have wanted it that way. He used to say that dying in bed was for people who'd given up. They worked in silence for a few minutes, her digging, Nathaniel watching, and feeling increasingly awkward about just standing there. "Where did you learn to run a ranch?" she asked suddenly. "Trial and error, mostly error at first." "You weren't raised to it?" "Sharecropper family, Tennessee." Nathaniel heard himself talking and wasn't entirely sure why. "Came west in '69 with nothing but a rifle and a bad attitude." "What changed?" "I stopped being afraid of hard work, started being afraid of staying poor." He watched her measure the hole depth with a marked stick. "Worked cattle drives until I could afford land. Bought this valley for almost nothing because everyone said it was too remote. Spent 12 years proving them wrong." "You did." She set another post. "This is prime land, water rights, grazing, timber. You chose well." It wasn't flattery, just assessment. Somehow that made it feel more genuine than any compliment he'd ever received. "You could have done something like this," Nathaniel said, "with your skills. Why didn't you?" Eliza's hand stilled on the post. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. "I tried," she said finally. "After my husband died, I had property. Not much, but enough. A small house in Deer Lodge, some savings. I planned to start a carpentry business. Women's furniture, custom pieces." She resumed packing dirt around the post. "Then I discovered my husband had debts I didn't know about, and a lawyer who decided those debts could be satisfied by selling my property out from under me. That's not legal. It is if you have the right judge, and the right paperwork, and a widow who doesn't understand territorial law." Her voice went flat. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was done. The house was sold. The savings were gone. The lawyer offered to help me contest it if I'd sign over power of attorney, which would have given him everything." Exactly. She tested the post, found it solid, and moved to the next location. "So I left. Took what I could carry, found the most remote place I could find where I could work and not be bothered." The word bothered carried enough weight to fill a canyon. "The lawyer's name?" Nathaniel asked. "Why?" "Because if he's in Helena, I know people who—" "No." Eliza turned to face him, and her expression was harder than the frozen ground. "I don't need rescue, Mr. Cross. I don't need a man to fix my problems. I need to fix them myself on my own terms, when I'm ready. I'm just offering—" "I know what you're offering. I've heard it before." She picked up the post hole digger again. It starts with, "Let me help you." Then it becomes, "I helped you, so you owe me." Then it becomes, "You can't manage without me." Then suddenly you're not a person anymore. You're a project, a thing someone fixed and therefore owns. That's not, isn't it? She met his eyes. "Tell me honestly, Mr. Cross, if you rode into Helena and handled my legal troubles, would you still see me as an equal, or would you see me as someone you saved?" The question hung in the cold air like an accusation. Nathaniel wanted to argue, wanted to say she was wrong, that he just wanted to help, that justice mattered. But he thought about the way he ran his ranch, the way he made decisions and expected them to be followed, the way he thought of his employees, capable, certainly, but ultimately under his authority and therefore his protection, the way control felt like safety. "I don't know," he said honestly. Eliza nodded slowly. "Thank you for that. Most men would lie." She returned to her work. "I'll handle my own problems, Mr. Cross, on my own timeline. I just need shelter and space while I figure out how." Nathaniel mounted his horse, feeling strangely dismissed. "The work is good," he said. "I know." He almost smiled. "You're very confident." "No, I'm very competent. There's a difference." She didn't look up from her digging. "Confidence is believing you can do something. Competence is having already done it 100 times. Nathaniel rode back toward the ranch house, his mind churning. Eliza Moore was everything he'd thought he wanted in an employee. Skilled, reliable, professional, unbothered by isolation. But she was also everything he didn't know how to handle. Independent, damaged, absolutely unwilling to accept anything that smelled like charity or control. And beneath the professional competence, there was rage. He'd seen it flash across her face when she talked about the lawyer, when she'd cut him off from offering help. The kind of rage that came from being betrayed by people who should have protected you. The kind of rage that either destroyed you or forged you into something unbreakable. Eliza Moore had clearly chosen the latter. Nathaniel just hoped he was smart enough not to mistake that strength for something he could manage. 2 weeks later, the fence line was finished. The barn door was fixed. The equipment shed roof no longer leaked. Nathaniel's ranch hands talked about the woman in the Eastern Valley with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. She'd appeared 3 times to repair equipment, once to fix a broken wagon axle, once to rebuild a feed trough, once to sharpen every blade in the tool shed to professional specifications. Each time, she arrived, did the work, answered only direct questions, and left. No small talk, no lingering, no interest in the social dynamics of the ranch. "She's strange, boss," one of the younger hands said during dinner. "Don't smile, don't chat, just works and leaves." "She's efficient," Dutch corrected, "and she does better work than half of you." That shut down the conversation, but Nathaniel saw the looks. His men weren't hostile. Eliza hadn't given them any reason to be. But they didn't know what to make of her. Neither did he. The contract specified twice monthly provisions. Nathaniel had Dutch handle the first delivery. Basic staples. Nothing special. But when he reviewed the supply inventory, something caught his attention. Eliza hadn't ordered coffee, or sugar, or any of the small luxuries that made winter isolation bearable. Just flour, dried beans, salt, lard. Survival rations. He added coffee, sugar, and a small bag of dried apples to the next delivery without telling Dutch. When the supplies came back untouched 3 days later with a note, "Contract specifies basic provisions only. Please remove luxury items." Nathaniel felt something twist in his chest. She was living on almost nothing, by choice, because the contract didn't explicitly include anything more. It bothered him more than it should have. That night, he rode to the Eastern Valley himself. Eliza was in her workshop, the lean-to she'd built against the cabin's north wall, equipped with a workbench, vise, and tools she'd apparently brought with her. She was building something that looked like a chair frame working by lantern light. "Mr. Cross?" She set down her saw. "Is there a problem?" "The coffee and sugar, why won't you take them?" "Because they're not in the contract." "I'm offering them." "As charity." She picked up sandpaper and began smoothing the wood. "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity, it's basic human decency." "Then modify the contract to include them, and I'll accept." She met his eyes. "Otherwise, it's a gift, and gifts create obligations." "Not every gift." "Every gift creates obligation, Mr. Cross. That's how it works. Someone gives you something, then they expect gratitude, then they expect consideration, then they expect compliance." Her hand moved steadily across the wood. "I've played that game. I won't play it again." Nathaniel felt his frustration building. "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being clear. There's a difference." "You're being stubborn." "Yes." No apology in her voice. "I am. Stubbornness is how I survived." They stared at each other across the workshop, lantern light casting shadows that made the moment feel larger than it was. "What happened to you?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "Life. Same thing that happens to everyone." Eliza returned to her work. "Some people get gentler versions. I didn't." The lawyer was one man in a long line of men who decided my life was something they could manage better than I could. Her sandpaper rasped against wood with sharp, angry strokes. My father's business partners who thought I should sell out after he died. My husband's family who thought I should remarry immediately. The banker who suggested alternative payment arrangements for my loans. The territorial officer who offered to waive filing fees in exchange for companionship. She said companionship like it was a profanity. They all wanted to help. They all had my best interests at heart. They all knew better than I did what I needed. She set down the sandpaper and looked at him. And they all wanted something in return. Always. Every single time. "I don't want anything from you," Nathaniel said. "You want me to be grateful, to soften, to accept your generosity and acknowledge your authority as something benevolent." Eliza's voice was perfectly calm. "That's what you want, Mr. Cross, for me to recognize that you're different, that you're one of the good ones. Maybe I am. Maybe you are." She picked up her saw again. "But I can't afford to find out, because if you're not, I'm alone in an isolated valley with no resources and no recourse. And if you are, I'll owe you. And debt, even emotional debt, is just another form of control. Nathaniel wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was wrong about him. But he thought about the way he'd signed that contract, the way he'd specified that she stay invisible, cause no problems, remain manageable. The way his first instinct had been to handle her legal problems without asking if she wanted them handled. The way he'd added those supplies to her provisions without discussing it first. The way he'd assumed his version of generosity was better than her version of independence. "You're right," he said. Eliza's hand stilled. "What?" "You're right. I did want you to be grateful. I did want to be the good one." He met her eyes. "And I didn't ask what you actually needed. I just assumed." For the first time since he'd met her, Eliza Moore looked genuinely surprised. "Most men don't admit that," she said quietly. "Most men don't meet women who force them to examine their assumptions." Nathaniel moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to your work." "Mr. Cross." He turned. Eliza stood in the lantern light, sawdust in her hair and something almost like respect in her gray eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for listening. For hearing what I actually said instead of what you wanted to hear." "You're welcome." He rode home through the frozen darkness, thinking about control and generosity and the distance between helping someone and respecting them. Thinking about a woman who'd been hurt so badly she couldn't accept coffee without seeing a trap, and thinking about whether he was capable of being the kind of man who could exist in her life without trying to fix it. He didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in 12 years, Nathaniel Cross wasn't absolutely certain he was right. And that uncertainty felt like the beginning of something he couldn't name. The first snow of March came hard and fast, dropping 8 inches overnight and turning Hackberry Valley into a study in white and gray. Nathaniel woke to Dutch pounding on his door at 5 in the morning with news that 3 sections of the northern fence had collapsed under the weight. "Get everyone out there," Nathaniel ordered, already pulling on his boots. "We've got cattle that could drift into the high country if they find those gaps." "Already sent 4 men. They'll need help with the repair work, though. That's a lot of fence to rebuild in this weather." Nathaniel paused, one arm through his coat sleeve. "Send word to Miss Moore. Ask if she's available." Dutch's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and left. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel was riding through knee-deep snow when he saw her coming from the eastern valley, post-hole digger strapped to her back and a heavy tool bag slung over one shoulder. She looked like she'd been traveling through a blizzard, which she had, but her stride never faltered. "Miss Moore," he called out. She altered course to meet him. "Mr. Cross, Dutch said you had fence damage." Northern section, 3 breaks. I didn't expect you to come out in this weather." Contract specifies maintenance and repair work. It doesn't specify only in good weather. She adjusted the tool bag. "Where do you need me?" They rode together to the damage site where his ranch hands had already begun assessment. The scene was worse than Nathaniel had feared. Not just collapsed sections, but completely destroyed posts, snapped like kindling under the combined weight of snow and ice. "We'll need to rebuild from foundation," one of the older hands said. "That's days of work." "We don't have days. We have until those cattle find the gaps." Nathaniel dismounted and started examining the damage. "We'll do temporary barriers first, proper repair after we've secured the herd." "That won't hold if we get another storm," the hand argued. "It doesn't need to hold forever. It needs to hold for 72 hours. Nathaniel turned to find Eliza already pacing the fence line, examining angles and measuring distances with her eyes. "Miss Moore? Assessment?" She walked back to them, her expression focused. "He's right. You don't have time for proper repair. But temporary won't work either. The posts are gone. Nothing to anchor to." She pointed down the line. "But if we do a hybrid approach, set new posts at double spacing, string wire at tension height, use the broken posts as ground bracing, we can create a barrier that's 60% as strong as the original in about 8 hours." "That's not possible," the ranch hand said. "It is if you stop arguing and start working." Eliza dropped her tool bag and pulled out a sketching pad, quickly drawing the design. "Double posts here, here, and here. Wire tension creates the barrier. Ground bracing prevents lateral shift. It won't be pretty, but it'll hold cattle until you can do proper repair next week." Nathaniel studied the sketch. It was brilliant, unconventional, but sound. "You've done this before?" "Similar situation in Deer Lodge. Flash flood took out a paddock fence. We had horses running loose and 6 hours until dark. She handed him the sketch. This'll work, but only if everyone follows the design exactly. The ranch hand looked skeptical. We taking orders from a woman now? The words hung in the cold air like a challenge. Nathaniel saw Eliza's expression close down into something neutral and professional. Saw her prepare to step back and let the men handle it their way, even though their way would fail. And something in him snapped. "You're taking orders from me," Nathaniel said quietly, "and I'm telling you to follow Miss Moore's design exactly as she specified. Anyone who has a problem with that can ride back to the ranch house and collect their final wages." Silence. The ranch hand's face flushed red, but he nodded. "Good. Miss Moore, you're in charge of this repair. Tell these men what you need." He saw surprise flicker across her face, quickly hidden, but there, before she turned to the crew and started issuing instructions in a calm, competent voice. For the next 8 hours, Nathaniel worked alongside his men under Eliza's direction. She organized them with military efficiency, 2 on post setting, 2 on wire stringing, 1 on bracing, rotation every hour to prevent exhaustion. She didn't ask them to do anything she wasn't doing herself. When the heaviest post needed setting, she was the first one lifting. When the wire tension needed testing, she was the one putting her weight against it. By 2 in the afternoon, the temporary barrier was complete. Not beautiful, but solid. Functional. Exactly as she'd promised. The cattle that had been drifting toward the gap turned away, contained. "Well, I'll be damned," Dutch muttered, examining the work. That actually held. Of course it held. Eliza was coiling excess wire, her movements efficient despite obvious exhaustion. Physics doesn't care about aesthetics. One of the younger ranch hands, Tommy, barely 19, approached her hesitantly. "Miss Moore, that thing you did with the double posts? That's real smart. Where'd you learn that?" "Trial and error." She handed him the coil of wire. "Mostly error at first, but error teaches faster than success if you're paying attention. Would you be willing to show me more techniques? I'm trying to learn proper carpentry." Nathaniel watched Eliza's expression carefully, saw her initial instinct to refuse, to maintain distance, to keep everything professional and impersonal. Then saw something soften, just slightly. "Saturday afternoons," she said. "If Mr. Cross approves, 2 hours. I'll teach basic joinery and fence repair. Bring your own tools." Tommy's face lit up. "Really? Thank you, Miss Moore." "Don't thank me yet. I'm a hard teacher." But there was something almost gentle in her voice. As the crew packed up and headed back toward the main ranch, Nathaniel fell into step beside Eliza. "You didn't have to offer to teach him," he said. "He asked respectfully. He wants to learn. Why wouldn't I?" She paused. "Unless you object to me spending time with your ranch hands?" "I don't object. I'm surprised." "That I'd help someone? That you'd let someone that close to your space?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment as they walked through the snow. "That boy reminds me of myself at his age. Eager to learn, frustrated by people who wouldn't teach because of who I was, rather than whether I could do the work." She adjusted the tool bag on her shoulder. "I won't be that person, not for someone who genuinely wants to learn." They reached the point where their paths diverged, hers toward the eastern valley, his toward the main ranch. "The fence design was exceptional," Nathaniel said. "You saved us days of work and probably a dozen head of cattle. It was adequate. It was more than adequate. It was the difference between solving a problem and surviving a crisis." He met her eyes. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She started to turn away, then stopped. "And thank you for backing my authority with your men. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. You were right. They were wrong. It's that simple." "It's never that simple. Not for most men." She studied him with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "You're surprising me, Mr. Cross." "Is that good or bad?" "I haven't decided yet." She walked away into the white landscape, and Nathaniel stood watching until she disappeared into the tree line, wondering when exactly this arrangement had stopped feeling like business and started feeling like something else entirely. Spring came slowly to Montana territory, fighting winter for every degree of warmth. By late April, the snow had retreated to the high peaks, and the valley floor had exploded into green so bright it hurt to look at. Eliza's contract was technically complete. The original terms had specified through April, but neither of them had mentioned it. She simply kept working. He simply kept providing provisions. And something had shifted between them in a way Nathaniel couldn't quite define. She still maintained her distance, still lived alone in the Eastern Valley, still kept their interactions professional and bounded. But there were small changes. She accepted coffee now. He'd formally amended the contract to include it after their argument, making it official rather than charity. She occasionally joined the Saturday evening meals at the ranch house when all the hands gathered, sitting quietly but present. She'd started teaching 3 of the younger workers in addition to Tommy, and Nathaniel would sometimes hear laughter from her workshop on Saturday afternoons. She was becoming part of the fabric of the ranch in a way that should have made him nervous but instead felt right. It was Dutch, who finally said what Nathaniel had been avoiding thinking about. "You planning to make her arrangement permanent?" his foreman asked one evening as they reviewed accounts. "I hadn't thought about it." Dutch gave him a look that said he was absolutely lying. "Fine," Nathaniel admitted. "I've thought about it, but I don't know if she'd accept. Woman's been here 6 months. She's good at her work. Men respect her. She's not causing any problems." Dutch closed the ledger. "Seems like an easy decision." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because permanent meant something different than temporary. Because permanent meant she wasn't just an employee, she was part of his life in a way that felt dangerous. Because every time he saw her, working in the workshop, fixing equipment, teaching the younger hands with patient precision, he felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with business. "I'll think about it," Nathaniel said instead. But thinking about it meant noticing things he'd been trying to ignore. The way she pushed hair out of her face when she was concentrating. The rare smile that transformed her entire expression when Tommy successfully completed a joint. The careful way she moved through space, always aware, always ready, never fully relaxed. The way she still flinched slightly when anyone approached from behind. One afternoon in early May, Nathaniel was walking past the Eastern Valley cabin when he heard raised voices. He recognized Eliza's tone, calm but with an edge, and a man's voice he didn't know. He approached quickly but quietly. A stranger stood in front of Eliza's workshop, dressed in an expensive suit that was utterly impractical for ranch country. Eliza stood in her doorway, blocking entrance, her posture rigid. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, Mr. Fletcher, but you need to leave," she was saying. "Miss Moore. Or is it Mrs. Moore still? I've lost track." The man's voice dripped condescension. "I've come a long way to discuss your situation." "I have no situation to discuss with you. Your former property in Deer Lodge has been stolen. The word you're looking for is stolen." Eliza's voice was ice. "By you, through fraudulent debt claims and a corrupt magistrate. That's a serious accusation." "It's a factual statement." Fletcher smiled, and Nathaniel felt his hands curl into fists. "I'm here to offer you an opportunity to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding. If you're willing to be reasonable, get off this property." Nathaniel stepped into view. "Now," Fletcher turned, his expression shifting from predatory to cautious. "And you are?" "The man who owns this land, which means you're trespassing." Nathaniel moved to stand beside Eliza. "Miss Moore asked you to leave. I'm telling you." "This is a private legal matter." "Not anymore." Nathaniel let his voice drop into the register he used when making absolutely clear he would not be argued with. "You have 60 seconds to get on your horse and ride out of this valley. If you're still here after that, I'll have my men escort you, and they won't be gentle." Fletcher's face flushed red. "You have no authority to—" 50 seconds. The lawyer looked at Eliza. "This isn't over." "Yes," she said quietly. "It is. You took my property. You won. But you don't get me. You never did, and you never will." Fletcher opened his mouth to respond, saw Nathaniel's expression, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He mounted his horse and rode off at a pace that suggested genuine fear. Nathaniel watched until he was out of sight, then turned to Eliza. She was shaking, barely visible, but definitely shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Fine." Her voice was steady, even though her hands weren't. "Thank you for intervening, but I had the situation under control." I know you did. I intervened anyway. He studied her face. That was the lawyer? Benjamin Fletcher, yes. She wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know how he found me. Does it matter? It matters that I'm not as hidden as I thought I was. She walked into her workshop and sat heavily on the workbench. It matters that he still thinks he can intimidate me into giving him something. Nathaniel followed her inside. What did he want? The same thing he's always wanted. Control. Eliza stared at her hands. He thinks if he pressures me enough, I'll sign over power of attorney to resolve the misunderstanding, which would give him legal authority to manage any assets I might acquire in the future. That's insane. That's greed. She looked up at him. He made a profit on my property, but not as much as he'd hoped. He thought I'd be desperate enough to sign anything. When I wasn't, he got angry. Men like Fletcher don't handle rejection well. I can ride into Deer Lodge, talk to the territorial magistrate. There has to be. No. Eliza stood up. Please don't. Why not? You have a legitimate claim. I have a claim based on my word against a lawyer's documentation in a system that assumes women don't understand business. Her voice was bitter. Do you know what happens when a widow contests property decisions? She gets asked if she really understood what her husband was doing. She gets asked if she's emotionally stable enough to make rational decisions. She gets asked if maybe she should let a qualified professional help her. That's legal, normal, expected. Eliza's gray eyes met his. I can't fight him in that system, Mr. Cross. I don't have the money for lawyers. I don't have the credibility. I don't have the social standing. All I have is my ability to work and my determination to survive on my own terms. Nathaniel wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that justice mattered, that right was right, that he could help fix this. But he remembered their conversation about gifts and obligations, about help turning into control, about the difference between supporting someone and saving them. What do you want? He asked instead. Eliza blinked. What? Not what you think you should want, not what's practical. What do you actually want? She was quiet for a long moment, her expression shifting through emotions Nathaniel couldn't quite read. I want my life back, she said finally, not the property. I don't care about the house anymore, but the feeling of having built something, of being respected for my work, of not having to constantly prove I deserve to exist in space. She sat back down. I want what you have. The ability to make decisions and have them respected. The assumption that I know what I'm doing. The freedom to fail or succeed on my own merits. You have that here. For now. Under your protection. Because you allow it. She met his eyes. But it's not mine, Mr. Cross. It's borrowed. And borrowed things can be taken away. The words hit harder than they should have. I wouldn't. I know. I believe that. Her voice softened slightly. But the structure remains the same. This is your land, your ranch, your authority. I exist here because you permit it, and permission can be revoked. Nathaniel sat down beside her on the workbench, careful to maintain distance. What would make it yours? He asked. Property. Legal ownership. Something no one can take away through manipulation or pressure. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Which requires money I don't have and legal processes I can't navigate alone. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the tools and half-finished projects that filled her workshop. Then Nathaniel made a decision. I'm going to Helena next week, he said. Territorial business. While I'm there, I'm going to talk to my lawyer about your case. Mr. Cross, not to file anything, not to act on your behalf. He held up a hand. Just to ask questions, to understand what legal options exist, to get information. He turned to face her. Information that I'll give to you, and then you decide what to do with it. Your choice. Your decision. Your timeline. Eliza studied him warily. Why would you do that? Because Fletcher showing up here pisses me off. Because what happened to you was wrong. And because you deserve to make informed decisions even if you don't have the resources to hire lawyers yourself. He stood up. I'm offering information, Miss Moore. Nothing more. What you do with it is entirely up to you. She was quiet for so long he thought she'd refuse. Information only, she said finally. No actions taken without my explicit consent. Agreed. And if I decide to do nothing, you respect that decision. I will. Even if you think I'm wrong? Even then. Eliza nodded slowly. All right. Thank you. Nathaniel turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Moore, what you've built here, your workshop, your teaching, the respect you've earned from the men, that is yours. I didn't give that to you. You created it, and no one can take it away. He walked out before she could respond, but he heard her voice follow him, quiet but clear. Thank you for understanding the difference. Helena was a 3-day ride from the ranch. Nathaniel took Dutch with him and tried to focus on the territorial business he'd legitimately needed to handle. Land surveys, grazing permits, water rights documentation. But his mind kept drifting to Eliza and the story she'd told him in pieces over 6 months. A competent woman systematically stripped of everything she'd built because the law assumed she needed managing. It made him furious in a way he couldn't quite articulate. His lawyer, Robert Morrison, was a shrewd man in his 50s who'd helped Nathaniel navigate the complex territorial legal system for years. When Nathaniel explained the situation, carefully, without using Eliza's name, Morrison's expression grew grim. It's a common pattern, he said, predatory legal practice targeting widows and single women. They use debt claims, often fabricated or exaggerated, to force property sales, then offer to help resolve the situation in exchange for power of attorney or other legal control. Is there any recourse? Legally? Very difficult. The documentation is usually technically correct, even if the underlying debts are questionable. And territorial courts are, let's say, they're not particularly sympathetic to women contesting financial decisions. Morrison leaned back in his chair. But there are ways. If you could prove the debt was fraudulent, or if you could demonstrate the lawyer acted in bad faith, or if you had leverage to negotiate a settlement. What kind of leverage? Evidence of other fraudulent cases, testimony from witnesses, pressure from business partners. Morrison studied Nathaniel carefully. Or financial pressure. Most of these lawyers are operating on thin margins. A sustained legal challenge, even one they'd likely win, can be expensive enough to motivate settlement. And if someone wanted to pursue that challenge, they'd need a lawyer willing to work on contingency or delayed payment. They'd need to be prepared for a long fight, and they'd need to understand that the system is designed to favor property holders over claimants. Morrison paused. Who is this woman, Nathaniel? Someone who deserves better than she got. Are you planning to fund her legal challenge? Nathaniel thought about Eliza's face when she'd talked about gifts and obligations, about help turning into control. I'm planning to give her information so she can make her own choice, he said carefully. If she decides to pursue it, I'm planning to offer support, financial and otherwise, without strings attached. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Without strings? That's unusual for you. Maybe I'm learning that control isn't the same as protection. His lawyer smiled slightly. Good. That's a valuable lesson. He pulled out paper and started making notes. Give me the lawyer's name and the approximate date of the property transaction. I'll do some research, quietly. No official filings, just information gathering. Nathaniel provided what details he knew. 2 days later, Morrison called him back to the office with a folder full of documents. Benjamin Fletcher, he said, spreading papers across the desk. 43 years old, based in Deer Lodge. Moderate reputation, nothing spectacular. But here's what's interesting. He's been named in 3 separate complaints in the past 5 years, all involving property transactions with widows or single women, all dismissed for lack of evidence. 3? There's a pattern. Exactly, and patterns can be useful. Morrison pointed to another document. I also found the original property filing for your friend's case. The debt claim was for $800 allegedly owed by her deceased husband to a mining supply company. The company confirmed the debt existed but said it was for $300, not $8. Someone altered the records. Nathaniel felt cold rage settling in his chest. Can that be proven? Possibly. If we can get the original company records and compare them to the court filings. Morrison hesitated. But Nathaniel, this kind of investigation requires formal legal action, which means it requires your friend to be willing to become a plaintiff, to testify, to undergo questioning, to have her entire life examined in court. She'd hate that. Most people would. Morrison gathered the documents. The question is whether justice is worth the cost of getting it. Nathaniel thought about Eliza's face when Fletcher had shown up at the ranch. The way she'd been shaking, the way she'd talked about wanting her life back but refusing to be rescued. "That's not my question to answer," he said. "It's hers." He rode back to the ranch with Morrison's folder secured in his saddlebag and a knot of uncertainty in his stomach. He'd promised information. He'd gathered information. Now he had to give it to Eliza and trust her to make her own choice, even if that choice meant doing nothing, even if that choice meant watching her live with injustice because the cost of fighting it was too high. It was the hardest kind of respect, honoring someone's autonomy even when you desperately wanted to fix their problems for them. When he arrived back at the ranch, he sent word to Eliza that he'd returned and had information to share whenever she was ready. He expected her to come the next day, or maybe the day after. She arrived within the hour. "You found something," she said without preamble. "I found information. Whether it's useful is up to you." He handed her Morrison's folder. "My lawyer did some research. No filings, no official actions, just investigation." Eliza sat down at his office desk and started reading. Nathaniel watched her face as she absorbed the details. The pattern of complaints against Fletcher, the debt discrepancy, the potential for proving fraud. She read every page twice before speaking. "This is enough to challenge the original ruling," she said quietly. "Potentially. If you're willing to become a plaintiff, if you're willing to testify and undergo questioning, if you're willing to spend months or possibly years in legal proceedings." Nathaniel sat across from her. "My lawyer said he'd take the case on contingency if you decide to pursue it, but he was very clear about what it would require from you. Public testimony, cross-examination, my entire history examined and questioned." Eliza's hands were tight on the folder. "Everything I've been trying to escape from." "Yes." She was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents. "I don't know if I can do that," she said finally. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand in a courtroom and let them pick apart my life, my marriage, my decisions, my worthiness as a human being. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." "Strength has limits, Mr. Cross." She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been surviving by keeping my head down, by avoiding notice, by being competent enough to be valuable but invisible enough to be safe. What you're describing requires the opposite. It requires making myself a target. I know. And if I fail, if the court sides with Fletcher again, I'll have exposed myself for nothing. I'll be right back where I started, except now everyone will know I challenged the system and lost." Nathaniel wanted to promise her she wouldn't fail, wanted to assure her that justice would prevail, wanted to tell her he'd make sure everything worked out. But those would be lies, or at best, promises he couldn't guarantee. "I can't tell you what to do," he said instead. "I can only tell you that whatever you decide, I'll support it. If you want to pursue this, my lawyer is ready, and I'll cover any costs that aren't recovered through contingency. If you want to walk away, I'll respect that choice, and we never speak of it again." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Eliza wiped at her eyes angrily. "Why are you doing this?" "Because what happened to you was wrong. Because you deserve the chance to fight back if you want to, and because—" He paused, realizing he was about to say something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. "Because I care about what happens to you, not as an employee, as a person." The admission hung between them. "That's dangerous," Eliza said quietly. "I know. For both of us. I know that too." She stood up, still holding the folder. "I need time to think about this. Take all the time you need." She walked to the door, then turned back. "Mr. Cross? Nathaniel?" It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Thank you. For getting the information, for respecting my choice, for seeing me as more than a problem to be solved." "You were never a problem, Eliza." Her name felt right in his mouth. "You were always a person. I'm just sorry it took me so long to act like it." She smiled, small but genuine, and left. Nathaniel sat alone in his office, wondering when exactly he'd stopped thinking of Eliza Moore as a capable employee and started thinking of her as someone whose happiness mattered more than his own need for control. And wondering what the hell he was going to do about these feelings that grew stronger every time she looked at him with those gray eyes that had learned to trust so carefully. Outside his window, the sun set over Hackberry Valley in shades of gold and crimson, and Nathaniel Cross, who'd spent 12 years certain of everything, found himself uncertain of the one thing that mattered most. 3 days passed with no word from Eliza. Nathaniel forced himself not to ride to the Eastern Valley, not to ask Dutch if he'd seen her, not to manufacture reasons to check on her progress with current projects. She needed space to think. He'd given his word to respect her timeline, but the waiting was killing him. On the 4th day, she appeared at his office door just after dawn, the folder still in her hand and something resolute in her expression. "I want to do it," she said without preamble. "I want to fight." Nathaniel stood from his desk, relief and concern flooding through him in equal measure. "You're sure?" "No, I'm terrified." She stepped inside and closed the door. "But I'm more angry than I am afraid. Fletcher showing up here made me realize something. I can run, I can hide, I can rebuild my life somewhere else. But it doesn't matter. Men like him will always find women like me. They'll always think they have the right to control us, to profit from our vulnerability, to treat our autonomy like something negotiable." She set the folder on his desk with enough force to make the inkwell rattle. "I'm done running. I'm done letting fear make my decisions. I'm done letting him win just because fighting back is hard." Her gray eyes blazed. "If I'm going to be afraid anyway, I might as well be afraid while doing something that matters." Nathaniel felt something fierce and proud unfurl in his chest. "Morrison said he'd need you to come to Helena, to review the case, give testimony, sign the formal complaint. It could take weeks." "Then I'll go to Helena." She lifted her chin. "When?" "I'll send word today. He can probably see you within the week." Nathaniel paused. "I'll arrange safe travel. A coach or... I'll ride. I don't need a coach. It's a 3-day journey." "I'm aware. I've made longer rides in worse weather." She met his eyes. "I'm not fragile, Nathaniel. I'm angry. There's a difference." He smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm beginning to understand that." "Good." She picked up the folder again. "I'll need to prepare. Make a list of every document I still have from the original property claim, every witness who might remember the circumstances, every detail I can recall about Fletcher's actions." Her voice shifted into something businesslike and focused. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it right. I'll help however I can." "I know you will." Something softened in her expression. "That's why I'm willing to try. Because for the first time since my husband died, I have someone who supports me without trying to control me. Someone who gives me choices instead of making decisions for me." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "That matters more than you know." She left before he could respond, moving with the purposeful stride of someone who'd made a decision and refused to second-guess it. Nathaniel sent word to Morrison that afternoon. The reply came back within 48 hours. Morrison could see Eliza the following Monday. The case had merit. He was ready to proceed. The intervening days passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza worked with fierce concentration, documenting everything she could remember about the property transaction, the debt claims, Fletcher's actions and statements. Nathaniel watched her transform from someone hiding from her past into someone preparing to confront it head-on. It was terrifying and magnificent in equal measure. On the Sunday before her departure, she appeared at the main ranch house during the evening meal. The ranch hands looked up in surprise. She rarely joined them anymore, preferring to take her meals alone, but made room at the table without comment. Tommy was the first to speak. "Miss Moore, you all right?" "I'm leaving for Helena tomorrow. I'll be gone for a few weeks." She looked around the table at the men she'd taught, worked alongside, earned respect from. "I wanted to let you know, and to ask if you'd keep an eye on my workshop while I'm gone." "Of course," Tommy said immediately. "But why Helena? Is everything okay?" Eliza hesitated. Nathaniel saw her weighing how much to share, how vulnerable to make herself. "I'm pursuing legal action against someone who wronged me," she said finally. "It's complicated, and it's personal, and I don't want to discuss details. but I wanted you to hear it from me rather than through gossip. Dutch leaned back in his chair. This got anything to do with that fancy lawyer who showed up last week? Yes. Then I hope you tear him apart. Dutch's voice was flat and certain. Man who'd chase a woman halfway across the territory to harass her deserves whatever he gets. There was a murmur of agreement from the other ranch hands. Nathaniel saw Eliza's expression flicker with surprise. You're not going to ask what happened? She said. You're not going to ask what I did to deserve his attention? Don't need to, one of the older hands said. We've been working with you for months now. We know what kind of person you are. Whatever happened, I guarantee it wasn't your fault. Eliza's eyes went bright. She blinked rapidly and cleared her throat. Thank you. That means more than you know. You need someone to ride with you? Tommy asked. Helena's a long way alone. I'll be riding with her, Nathaniel said quietly. At least to Helena. I have business there anyway. That was a lie. He had no business in Helena, but no one called him on it. After the meal, as the hands dispersed to evening chores and card games, Eliza lingered. You don't have to come with me, she said once they were alone. I can make the journey myself. I know you can, but I'd like to be there, if you'll allow it. Why? Nathaniel considered lying. Considered saying something about protecting his investment in her legal case, or ensuring she arrived safely, or any of a dozen reasonable-sounding excuses. But Eliza deserved honesty. Because I care about what happens to you, he said. Because I want to support you through this, and because... He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence without saying too much. Because... she prompted quietly. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being an employee and started being someone I can't imagine this ranch without. He met her eyes. Someone I can't imagine my life without. The admission hung between them like something fragile and dangerous. That's complicated, Eliza said finally. I know. I'm not... She paused, choosing words carefully. I'm not ready for anything beyond what we have. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. My life has been too chaotic, too controlled by other people's decisions. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not running or hiding or surviving. I understand. Do you? She studied his face. Because most men say they understand, and then they wait. They give you space while silently expecting you to eventually come around, to eventually be ready, to eventually reward their patience with the relationship they wanted all along. Nathaniel felt the words hit home. Is that what I'm doing? I don't know. That's what scares me. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. I care about you too, Nathaniel. More than I expected to. More than is probably wise. But I can't be someone's project, someone's eventual prize. I need to be a person in my own right, making my own choices without the weight of someone else's expectations. Then that's what you'll be. Nathaniel took a careful step closer. I'm not waiting for you to become someone else, Eliza. I'm not expecting you to transform into someone more manageable or grateful or dependent. I care about exactly who you are right now, stubborn, independent, brilliant, and absolutely unwilling to compromise your autonomy. Her breath caught. You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow, and next month, and next year. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you for anything except the chance to be in your life, however that looks, whatever that means, on your terms, in your timeline. That's a lot to promise. I know, but I mean it. They stood in the dimming light of the ranch house kitchen, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. I need to finish packing, Eliza said finally, but she didn't move. I'll have the horses ready at dawn. Thank you for coming with me, for respecting my boundaries, for... She stopped, shook her head. Just thank you. She left before he could respond, and Nathaniel stood alone wondering if he'd just made a promise he could actually keep, or if he'd simply found a new way to lie to himself about control and want. They left at first light with Dutch's gruff farewell and Tommy's earnest wishes for good luck. The ride to Helena took 3 days as expected, and Nathaniel used the time to learn more about who Eliza had been before loss and betrayal had reshaped her. She'd been happy once. That was the part that surprised him most. She talked about her father's carpentry business with genuine warmth, about learning to read architectural plans at 12, about the satisfaction of building something with her own hands and seeing it stand strong. "I thought I'd take over his business when he retired," she said on the second day as they watered the horses. "He was training me for it, teaching me not just the craft but the business side, estimates, contracts, supplier relationships. He wanted me to be ready." "What happened?" "He died before he could make it official, and his business partners assumed I'd sell them my share. When I insisted on continuing to work, they made it clear I wasn't welcome." She stared at the water. "That's when I met James, my husband. He was a carpenter too. We thought we'd start our own business together." "Did you?" "For a while, 2 years. We did good work, built a reputation." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "We were happy, building towards something, making plans. And then? And then a tree fell wrong during a logging job he'd taken for extra money. Killed him instantly." Her voice went flat. "Suddenly, I was a widow with debts I didn't know about and assets I couldn't access without male oversight. His family wanted me to remarry immediately, specifically to James's brother, who'd always looked at me in ways that made my skin crawl. The business partners offered to buy me out for a fraction of what it was worth. The bank suggested I'd need a male co-signer for any future loans." She turned away from the creek, her expression hard. "That's when Fletcher showed up. Presented himself as someone who could help me navigate the legal complications. Someone who understood how difficult it was for a woman in my position." Her laugh was bitter. "I was desperate and grieving, and he seemed like the only person offering actual assistance, so I trusted him. And he used that trust against you. Systematically, methodically. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already filed the debt claims and initiated the property sale. I tried to fight it, but..." She shrugged. "The system wasn't built for women like me to win, so I took what I could carry, and I ran." Nathaniel felt rage burning in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "You didn't run. You survived. There's a difference." "Is there?" Eliza mounted her horse again. "Sometimes I'm not sure." They reached Helena on the third day, dusty and tired, but with enough time to find lodging before Eliza's meeting with Morrison the next morning. Nathaniel secured rooms at a respectable boarding house. Separate rooms, separate floors, because whatever existed between them wasn't that and might never be. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed and staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, Nathaniel admitted something to himself that he'd been avoiding for months. He was in love with Eliza Moore. Not the careful, manageable affection he'd felt for women before. Not the strategic interest in a suitable match that he'd occasionally entertained, but actual, inconvenient, terrifying love for a woman who might never be ready to love him back. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, was that loving her meant letting her make her own choices, even if those choices didn't include him. The next morning, Morrison's office was exactly what Nathaniel expected. Organized, professional, lined with law books and territorial statutes. Morrison himself greeted Eliza with respect, and none of the condescension she'd clearly learned to expect from lawyers. "Miss Moore, thank you for making the journey." He gestured to a chair. "I've reviewed the documents Mr. Cross provided and done additional research into Mr. Fletcher's practice. I believe we have a strong case, but I need to be frank with you about what pursuing this will require." "I'm listening." Morrison spent the next hour outlining the legal process, the formal complaint, the evidence gathering, the depositions, the eventual trial if Fletcher didn't settle. He was brutally honest about the challenges they'd face and the scrutiny Eliza would undergo. "Defense attorneys in these cases typically try to undermine the plaintiff's credibility," he said. "They'll question your judgment, your memory, your understanding of financial matters. They'll imply you were complicit in your husband's debts. They'll suggest you're pursuing this action out of bitterness or mental instability rather than legitimate grievance." "I know," Eliza said calmly. "I expected that." "They may also bring up your current living situation. The fact that you're residing on Mr. Cross's property could be portrayed as..." He paused delicately. "As a relationship that compromises your independence or judgment." Nathaniel felt his jaw tighten, but Eliza's expression didn't change. "I have a contract with Mr. Cross, labor for housing. It's a standard employment arrangement." "I understand that. I'm simply warning you that opposing counsel may try to paint it differently. Morrison leaned back. The question is whether you're prepared to defend not just the property claim, but every aspect of your life and decisions for the past 2 years. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then she straightened in her chair and met Morrison's eyes with something fierce and uncompromising. Mr. Morrison, I've spent 2 years being judged for my choices, being questioned about my competence, being treated like I need supervision or protection or correction. Her voice was steady and cold. If I have to endure more of that in order to hold Fletcher accountable, then that's what I'll do. Because the alternative is spending the rest of my life knowing I let him win because I was too afraid of scrutiny. Morrison smiled slightly. Good. That's the attitude we'll need. He pulled out a stack of documents. Let's begin with your formal statement. I'll need you to walk me through every interaction with Fletcher, every document you signed, every conversation you can recall. Take your time. Details matter. For the next 3 hours, Eliza recounted her story with methodical precision. Nathaniel sat in the corner, officially present as a witness to her account, unofficially there because he couldn't bear to leave her alone in this. He watched her face as she described the days after her husband's death, the confusion and grief, Fletcher's initial kindness that had seemed like salvation, the gradual realization that every piece of help came with strings attached. The moment she'd understood she was trapped, her voice never wavered, her hands stayed steady. But Nathaniel saw the cost in the tightness around her eyes, the careful control of her breathing. When Morrison finally called a break, Eliza stepped outside for air. Nathaniel followed after a moment and found her leaning against the building, eyes closed, breathing slowly. You're doing well, he said quietly. I feel like I'm being flayed alive. She opened her eyes. Every question is a reminder of how stupid I was, how naive, how completely I failed to protect myself. You weren't stupid. You were grieving, and he exploited that. I should have seen it coming. He was a professional predator. You were a woman who just lost her husband. The fault is his, not yours. Eliza pushed off the wall. Then why does it feel like I'm the one on trial? Because the system is broken. Nathaniel moved closer. But you're fighting to fix it, not just for yourself, for every woman who comes after you. She looked at him for a long moment. Is that what I'm doing, or am I just seeking revenge? Does it have to be one or the other? I don't know. She rubbed her face tiredly. Morrison wants me to stay in Helena for the next 2 weeks. There are depositions to take, witnesses to interview, documents to review. I'll need to be available. I'll stay with you. You have a ranch to run. Dutch can handle it for 2 weeks. I'm staying. Nathaniel, I'm not negotiating, Eliza. I'm not leaving you alone in this city to face this process by yourself. He gentled his voice. You can tell me to wait at the boarding house. You can tell me not to attend meetings. You can set whatever boundaries you need, but I'm not going back to the ranch without you. She studied his face, searching for something. Why are you so invested in this? Because I care about you. I told you that. But this is more than care. This is... She gestured helplessly. This is upending your life for my fight. Your fight became mine the moment Fletcher stepped onto my property and threatened you. Nathaniel held her gaze. You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Eliza. You don't have to be completely self-sufficient to prove your worth. Accepting support isn't the same as surrendering autonomy. How do you know the difference? Because support is offered without expectation, without strings, without the requirement that you become someone different in exchange. He took a careful breath. I'm not staying in Helena because I expect you to owe me. I'm staying because I can't imagine being anywhere else while you're going through this. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. This would be easier if you were like other men. I know. If you tried to control me or rescue me or make this about what you want, I could maintain distance. I could keep my walls up. Her voice cracked slightly. But you keep being decent and patient and genuinely supportive, and it's terrifying. Why terrifying? Because it makes me want things I can't afford to want. She turned away. We should go back inside. Morrison is waiting. She walked back into the building before Nathaniel could respond, leaving him standing in the Helena Street, wondering if he had just been given hope or a warning. The next 2 weeks blurred together into a series of depositions, document reviews, and legal strategy sessions. Morrison was thorough and relentless, building a case piece by piece. He tracked down the mining supply company that had originally extended credit to Eliza's husband and obtained their records showing the actual debt, $300, not $800 as Fletcher had claimed. He found 2 other women who'd had similar experiences with Fletcher, one who'd settled out of desperation, another who'd simply disappeared rather than fight. Both were willing to testify to the pattern of behavior. He documented discrepancies in the property sale documents that suggested Fletcher had manipulated the timeline to prevent Eliza from mounting an effective challenge. The case grew stronger each day. And each day, Nathaniel watched Eliza grow more exhausted and more determined in equal measure. She spent hours with Morrison reviewing testimony, preparing for cross-examination, steeling herself for the scrutiny she knew was coming. She spent evenings in her boarding house room reviewing documents until her eyes burned. And occasionally, not often, but occasionally, she'd appear at Nathaniel's door and ask if they could just sit together without talking about the case. Those were the moments he treasured most, sitting in companionable silence, watching her gradually relax, seeing the fierce determination soften into something more vulnerable and human. On the 12th night, she fell asleep in the chair across from him while they were reading. Nathaniel watched her sleep for a moment, face finally peaceful, defenses finally down, and felt his heart break with how much he wanted to protect her and how completely he understood that protection wasn't what she needed. She needed respect, support, space to be strong on her own terms. He covered her with a blanket and went to sleep on his own bed, leaving her to rest undisturbed. By the 14th day, Morrison had completed his preparations. "We're ready," he told them over breakfast at a small cafe. "I filed the formal complaint. Fletcher has been served. We'll have a preliminary hearing within the month to determine if the case goes to trial." "What are the chances he'll settle?" Eliza asked. "Honestly, 50-50. The evidence is damning, but trials are expensive and unpredictable. He may decide settling for less than full restitution is preferable to risking a verdict that finds him liable for fraud." Morrison paused. "The question is what you want, Miss Moore. If he offers to return your original $300 and drop any future claims, would you accept? Or do you want to push for full restitution of the property value?" Eliza was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee absently. "I want justice," she said finally, "but I also want to move forward. I don't want to spend the next year of my life consumed by this case, constantly reliving the worst period of my life, making every decision based on legal strategy." She looked up at Morrison. "If he offers fair compensation and a legal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, I'll consider settlement, but not if it requires me to sign any agreement that limits my future autonomy or ability to discuss what happened." "That's reasonable. I'll make our position clear during negotiations." Morrison smiled slightly. "You've been an excellent client, Miss Moore. Most people in your position would let anger override strategy. You've maintained clarity about what you actually want versus what feels satisfying." "I've had good advice," she glanced at Nathaniel, "and good support." They left Helena the next morning, the case filed and the wheels of justice slowly beginning to turn. The ride back to the ranch felt different than the ride to Helena, lighter somehow, despite the uncertainty of the outcome. Eliza seemed more at peace, still cautious, still guarded, but with some of the rigid control relaxed. "Thank you for staying," she said on the second day as they made camp. "I know you said you would, but actually doing it, being present through all of that, that's different than just making promises." "I meant what I said, about wanting to support you. I know, I'm starting to believe that." She poked at the fire. "That's new for me, believing someone means what they say." "I'm sorry it has to be new. It should have always been true." "Should have isn't the same as is." She looked at him across the flames. "But maybe with you, it can be." They reached the ranch on the third day to find everything running smoothly under Dutch's management. Tommy rushed out to greet them, full of questions about Helena, that Eliza answered patiently while Nathaniel handled the horses. That evening, after she'd returned to her cabin and the ranch had settled into its normal rhythms, Nathaniel sat in his office reviewing accounts and trying not to think about how empty the 2 weeks without her had felt. There was a knock at his door. "Come in," Liza entered, and something in her expression made Nathaniel set down his pen. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble, "about what happens if the case settles, about what I want my life to look like after this is resolved. All right, I don't want to go back to Deer Lodge. There's nothing there for me anymore." She moved further into the room. "But I also can't stay here indefinitely under a labor contract. It's not enough anymore." Nathaniel's heart sank. "You want to leave?" "No, I want to stay, but differently." She met his eyes. "I want property of my own, land I own legally, that no one can take away. I want a workshop where I can take clients, build a real carpentry business. I want to be part of this community, not as your employee, but as an independent person." He stopped, recalibrating. "That's reasonable. What do you need from me to make that possible?" Eliza pulled a folded document from her pocket. "I want to buy the land where my cabin sits. 20 acres. I've calculated what I could afford if the settlement provides fair compensation for my Deer Lodge property. It's not much, but it's a start." She handed him the document. It was a proposed land purchase agreement, meticulously detailed, with a price that was significantly below market value. "This is too low," Nathaniel said. 20 acres of valley land is worth at least— "I know what it's worth. That's what I can afford." Her chin lifted. "I'm not asking for charity, Nathaniel. I'm proposing a legitimate purchase at the price I can actually pay. If that's not acceptable, I'll understand. I'll find land elsewhere." Nathaniel looked at the number again, looked at her face, proud, determined, absolutely unwilling to accept anything that felt like a gift, and made a decision. "I'll accept your offer on one condition," he said. Her expression went wary. "What condition?" "The land deed includes water rights and access easements that ensure you can run a legitimate business, and I'll hold a note for the remaining value difference, payable whenever you're able, with no interest and no fixed timeline." "That's charity. That's investment in a business I believe will succeed." Nathaniel stood and moved around the desk. "You're going to build something remarkable, Eliza. I want to make sure you have the resources to do it right. Not because I'm rescuing you, but because you've earned it through 2 years of excellent work and because I believe in what you're going to create." She stared at him, emotions flickering across her face too quickly to read. "Why does this feel different than before?" she asked quietly. "Why does this offer feel different than the coffee and sugar?" "Because you're not accepting it out of desperation. You're negotiating it from a position of knowledge and power. Because you're choosing this with full awareness of alternatives." He held her gaze. "And because I'm not offering it to make you grateful or dependent. I'm offering it because your success matters to me independent of what it means for us." "Us," she repeated softly. "Is there an us?" "I don't know. That's up to you." Eliza moved to the window, looking out at the valley she'd rebuilt herself in, literally and metaphorically. "If I accept this, if I buy the land and build my business here, I'm choosing to stay in your life," she said. "Not because I have to. Not because I'm dependent on you, but because I want to. Because this place has become home in a way nowhere else has. Because, She stopped, and Nathaniel waited, barely breathing. "Because you've become important to me," she finished. "And that's terrifying, but it's also true, and I'm tired of running from true things just because they scare me." "I'm terrified too," Nathaniel admitted. "I've spent 12 years building control and certainty, and then you showed up and dismantled every assumption I had about what strength looks like and what partnership means." She turned from the window to face him. "I'm not ready for anything more than this. Friendship, partnership, mutual respect. I don't know if I'll ever be ready for more." "Then that's what we'll have. For as long as that's what you want." "You say that now." "I'll say it tomorrow and next month and next year," Nathaniel interrupted gently. "I know what I want, Eliza. I want you in my life, however that looks. I'm not waiting for you to become someone different. I'm just grateful for who you are right now." She crossed the room in 3 strides, and before Nathaniel could process what was happening, she'd wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug that felt like trust and terror and hope all tangled together. He held her carefully, like something precious and breakable, even though he knew she was neither. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for seeing me, for respecting me, for being patient with how broken I am." You're not broken. You're surviving. He rested his cheek against her hair. And you're doing it with more grace and strength than anyone I've ever known. They stood like that for a long moment before she pulled back, wiping at her eyes. I should go. It's late. Eliza, we'll finalize the land purchase once the case settles, she said, already moving toward the door. And I'll start drawing plans for the workshop expansion, and maybe we can have dinner sometime. Just the two of us. Not business, just, I'd like that. She smiled, real and warm and devastating, and left. Nathaniel stood alone in his office, holding a land purchase agreement that represented everything he'd never known he wanted. Not control, not possession, but partnership with someone strong enough to stand beside him rather than behind him. Someone who'd chosen to stay not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. And for the first time in 12 years, Nathaniel Cross understood that the most powerful thing you could give someone wasn't protection or provision. It was choice. And Eliza Moore had finally chosen him. The telegram from Morrison arrived on a Thursday morning in late June, delivered by a writer who'd made the journey from Helena specifically for the message. Nathaniel read it twice before walking to the Eastern Valley, where Eliza was working on plans for her workshop expansion. She looked up from the drafting table she'd built herself, saw his expression, and set down her pencil. News? Fletcher wants to settle. Nathaniel handed her the telegram. He's offering full restitution of the property value, $1,200, plus legal acknowledgement that the debt claim was inflated. No gag order, no limitations on your future actions. Eliza read the message slowly, her face unreadable. $1,200. That's more than the house was worth. Morrison thinks Fletcher's scared. The evidence is damning, and the pattern of behavior with other women makes him vulnerable to criminal fraud charges if this goes to trial. Nathaniel leaned against the door frame. He's cutting his losses. And if I refuse? If I push for trial? Morrison says we'd likely win, but it could take another year and there's always risk in letting a jury decide. He paused. The question is what you want. Eliza set the telegram down and walked to the window of her cabin, looking out at the land she was planning to purchase, the workshop she was designing, the life she was building. I want it to be over, she said finally. I want to stop living in the past and start building the future. I want to take his money, use it to secure my independence, and never think about Benjamin Fletcher again. That's a good answer. Is it? She turned to face him. Or is it the coward's answer? Should I push for trial, make him face public consequences, ensure he can't do this to other women? You've already ensured that. The legal complaint is public record. The evidence Morrison gathered will follow Fletcher regardless of whether this settles or goes to trial. Nathaniel moved into the cabin. You've already done the brave thing, Eliza. You stood up, you fought back, you refused to disappear quietly. Accepting settlement isn't cowardice. It's choosing to prioritize your own healing over his punishment. She considered this, her expression thoughtful. You really believe that? I do. Justice isn't always about maximum consequences. Sometimes it's about restoring what was taken and moving forward. Eliza nodded slowly. Then I'll accept. Tell Morrison to finalize the settlement. Are you sure? Yes. Her voice was firm. I'm sure. $1,200 means I can buy the land outright, build a proper workshop, maybe even take on an apprentice eventually. It means I can stop surviving and start thriving. She met his eyes. That's worth more than the satisfaction of watching Fletcher squirm in court. Nathaniel sent the reply that afternoon. Within 2 weeks, the settlement was finalized. Fletcher signed a legal document acknowledging that the debt claim had been incorrect and that the property sale had been conducted under false pretenses. He paid $1,200 in restitution, and then, as Eliza had wanted, he disappeared from their lives entirely. The day the bank draft arrived, Eliza appeared at Nathaniel's office with the land purchase agreement she'd drawn up weeks earlier and a cashier's check for the amount she'd originally offered. I'm ready to make this official, she said. They rode into town together to file the deed transfer with the Territorial Land Office. Nathaniel watched Eliza sign her name on the official documents, watched her become a landowner in her own right, and felt something fierce and proud unfurl in his chest. She walked out of that office with a legal deed in her hand and an expression on her face that he'd never seen before. Not just satisfaction, not just relief, but something like wonder. "I own land," she said, staring at the document. 20 acres of valley property with water rights and timber access and mineral rights and... Her voice cracked slightly. "Nobody can take this away from me." "Nobody," Nathaniel confirmed. "It's yours, legally and permanently." She folded the deed carefully and tucked it into her jacket. I need a moment." She walked down the main street of town and Nathaniel followed at a distance, giving her space but unwilling to leave her completely alone in this moment. She ended up at the small park near the church, sitting on a bench and just breathing. Nathaniel sat beside her after a moment, close but not touching. "My father used to say that land was the only thing that couldn't lie to you," Eliza said quietly. "Crops might fail, buildings might burn, but the land itself was honest, constant, something you could build on and trust." She looked down at her hands. "I thought I'd never have that. I thought men like Fletcher would always find ways to take it from me." "Not anymore." "Not anymore," she agreed. She turned to him, and her eyes were bright but clear. "Thank you for making the land sale possible, for structuring it in a way that felt like genuine purchase rather than charity, for understanding why that mattered. You did this, Eliza. You fought for it. You earned it. I just held the deed." "You did more than that." She reached over and took his hand, the first time she'd initiated touch beyond that one fierce hug, and laced her fingers through his. "You gave me the space to fight, the support to stand, the respect to make my own choices. That's worth more than land." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, watching the town move around them. "I'm going to build something remarkable," Eliza said. "A workshop that produces furniture and architectural elements that people come from 3 territories to commission. A business that employs other craftspeople and teaches apprentices properly. A legacy. I know you will. And I want you to be part of it, not as my landlord or my employer or my rescuer." She squeezed his hand. "As my partner. Someone who celebrates my successes and supports me through failures and treats me like an equal in all things." "I can do that." "Can you?" She turned to face him fully. "Because partnership means I make decisions you might disagree with. It means I fail sometimes and you let me fail without trying to fix it. It means respecting my autonomy, even when you're scared for me, or frustrated with me, or convinced you know better." "I understand." "Do you? Because you're used to being in control. You've built your entire life around certainty and authority. What I'm asking, what I need, is someone who can sit with uncertainty and let me have authority over my own life." Nathaniel thought about the past 8 months, about every instinct he'd had to fix her problems, manage her choices, protect her from consequences. About how hard it had been to step back and let her make her own decisions, even when he was terrified she'd get hurt. About how much he'd grown by learning to do exactly that. "I won't pretend it's easy," he said honestly. "Every protective instinct I have wants to shield you from anything hard or painful or risky. But I've learned, you've taught me, that protection without respect is just control with better marketing." He met her eyes. "I can't promise I'll never want to fix things for you, but I can promise I'll catch myself and ask what you want instead of assuming I know better." Eliza studied his face for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me." "You deserve honesty." "I deserve a lot of things I've never gotten." She stood, pulling him up with her. "But maybe I'm finally in a position to demand them." They walked back through town together, still holding hands, and Nathaniel was acutely aware of the looks they were getting. He and Eliza had been seen together before, at territorial offices, at supply stores, riding to and from the ranch, but this was different. This was clearly personal, clearly intimate. This was announcing to the community that something had shifted between them. "People are staring," Eliza murmured. "Does that bother you?" "I don't know yet." She kept walking, chin up, stride confident. "Ask me again tomorrow." That evening, Eliza invited Nathaniel to dinner at her cabin, the first time she'd done so explicitly, rather than letting him show up and stay. She cooked a simple meal over her fireplace, and they ate at the table she'd built herself. And everything about it felt both ordinary and momentous. "I've been thinking about the workshop design," she said as they cleared dishes. "I want to include a showroom, Somewhere clients can see examples of finished work, discuss custom projects, place orders. That's smart business. It's also terrifying. She set down a plate and turned to him. It means making myself visible, advertising, putting my name and work out for public judgment, all the things I've been avoiding for 2 years. What changed? I changed, or maybe I just remembered who I used to be before fear made all my decisions. She dried her hands on a towel. I used to be someone who took pride in my work, who wanted people to see what I could do. Somewhere along the way, I became someone who just wanted to hide and survive. And now? Now I want to be visible again. I want people to know my name and seek out my work and pay premium prices for quality craftsmanship. A smile played at her lips. I want to be successful enough that Benjamin Fletcher hears about it and realizes he didn't break me. Nathaniel laughed. That's a good motivation. It's a petty motivation. It can be both. He moved closer. There's nothing wrong with wanting the people who hurt you to see you thrive. Eliza leaned back against the table, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. Nathaniel, what do you want from this? From us? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, I know what I want. Partnership, respect, independence within connection. But I don't know what you want beyond some vague sense of being supportive. She met his eyes. What does a successful relationship with me look like to you? He considered how to answer honestly without overwhelming her with the full depth of what he felt. I want to wake up knowing you're building something you're proud of, he said carefully. I want to share meals and conversation and the comfortable silence that comes from genuine understanding. I want to be the person you choose to tell about your successes and your frustrations. I want to build a life alongside yours rather than absorbing you into mine. That's beautiful. It's also careful. She tilted her head. What are you not saying? I'm not saying that I love you because I don't know if you're ready to hear that. The words hung between them. Eliza's expression flickered with something Nathaniel couldn't quite read. Not fear exactly, but not comfort either. I'm not ready to say it back, she said quietly. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Love has always come with conditions for me, with expectations and requirements and the slow erosion of self until nothing's left but what the other person wanted. I know. But I care about you, deeply, in ways that scare me because they feel too much like need, and I've learned that need makes you vulnerable. She pushed off the table and moved to the window. I don't want to need you, Nathaniel. I can't afford to need anyone. Caring isn't the same as needing, isn't it? How do you tell the difference? Nathaniel moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the darkening valley. Need is desperate. It's grasping. It's, I can't survive without you. Care is choosing. It's, my life is better with you in it, but I'd survive if you left. He paused. I care about you, Eliza. I love you, actually, but I don't need you to complete me or fix me or make my life meaningful. I'm a whole person who's choosing to share space with another whole person. That's a nice theory. It's not theory. It's what I've learned from watching you. He turned to face her. You're the strongest person I know precisely because you don't need anyone. You choose connection without requiring it. You build relationships without depending on them for survival. That's not weakness. It's the ultimate strength. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned and kissed him. It wasn't desperate or passionate or any of the things Nathaniel had imagined when he'd thought about this moment. It was soft and careful and questioning, a tentative exploration rather than a declaration. He kissed her back with the same carefulness, letting her set the pace in depth and duration. When she pulled back, her expression was complicated. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. Neither do I. I might never be ready for everything you want. Then we'll build something different than what I imagined. Something that works for who we actually are rather than who we think we should be. She rested her forehead against his shoulder. You're very patient. I'm very motivated to get this right. They stood like that for a while, holding each other carefully, neither pushing for more than the other was ready to give. Eventually, Eliza pulled back and cleared her throat. You should probably go. It's late and people will talk if your horse is seen here all night. Do you care if people talk? I care if they make assumptions that aren't true. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I want it to be on accurate terms. She walked him to the door. We're partners. We're building something together. We care about each other, but we're not. We're taking it slowly. Understood. And I need you to tell me if this isn't enough for you. If you need more than I can give, you have to be honest about that. Nathaniel cupped her face gently. This is enough. You are enough. Exactly as you are, with all your boundaries and caution and fierce independence. She kissed him again briefly, then stepped back. Good night, Nathaniel. Good night, Eliza. He rode back to the main ranch house through the summer darkness, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. They'd crossed some invisible line tonight, from friendship into something more, from separate lives into intentional connection. And somehow, despite all the uncertainty and caution and careful boundaries, it felt right. The next few months fell into a rhythm that suited them both. Eliza spent her days designing and building her workshop expansion, taking on small carpentry projects to build her reputation, teaching her apprentices with patient precision. Nathaniel ran his ranch and made excuses to ride past her property several times a week. They had dinner together twice a week, sometimes at her cabin, sometimes at the ranch house. They talked about business and books and territorial politics. They argued about carpentry techniques and ranching strategies. They sat in comfortable silence while she sketched and he reviewed accounts.